Imagine diving beneath the waters of the Mediterranean Sea. You descend slowly through the blue darkness. At first, you see nothing, only sand. Then suddenly, something enormous begins to appear, a giant stone face. You swim farther, and you see massive statues, broken columns, ancient coins, temple ruins, and objects that have been lying on the seabed for more than 1,000 years. But this isn't a shipwreck. You're looking at an entire city, a city that once welcomed kings, merchants, priests, soldiers, and sailors, a city that controlled one of the most important gateways into ancient Egypt. And somehow, it disappeared beneath the sea. This is the story of Thonis-Heracleion. For centuries, historians knew the name from ancient writings, but nobody knew where the city actually was. There were no visible ruins, no city walls, no temples standing above the ground. It was as if an entire civilization had been erased. But beneath the Mediterranean, the city was still there, waiting for someone to find it. Long before Alexandria became one of the most famous cities in the ancient world, Thonis-Heracleion stood near the mouth of the Nile. The Egyptians called it Thonis, the Greeks called it Heracleion, and its location made it incredibly important. Before Alexandria was founded in 331 BC, ships arriving from the Greek world entered Egypt through this region. That made Thonis-Heracleion a powerful international port. Imagine arriving here thousands of years ago. After sailing across the Mediterranean, your ship approaches the Egyptian coast. Ahead of you is a busy harbor. Ships are arriving from foreign lands. Merchants are unloading cargo. Sailors are preparing for their next journey. Goods are being exchanged. And people from different cultures are meeting in the same place. But Thonis-Heracleion wasn't just a trading center, it was also a major religious center. At the heart of the city stood the enormous temple of Amun-Gareb. The temple was closely connected with Egyptian religion and royal traditions. The city also became a place where Egyptian and Greek cultures met. Two worlds, one city. And for centuries, Thonis-Heracleion flourished. But the land beneath it was not as stable as it appeared. To understand how Thonis-Heracleion disappeared, we need to understand its environment. The city stood in the Nile Delta. This was a landscape shaped by water, rivers, sediment, and shifting land. It was fertile, it was wealthy, but it was also vulnerable. Over time, the land in this part of the Mediterranean gradually subsided. In other words, the ground slowly sank. Sea levels also changed. And then came powerful natural events. Researchers have found geological evidence of earthquakes and soil liquefaction in the region. Soil liquefaction can be devastating. When an earthquake or enormous pressure affects water-filled, clay-rich ground, the soil can suddenly lose much of its strength. Heavy buildings can lose their foundations, structures can tilt, walls can collapse, and entire sections of land can suddenly sink. Imagine standing in a city where enormous temples have stood for generations, and suddenly the ground beneath them begins to give way. Water enters the streets, buildings collapse, the coastline changes, and the city begins to disappear. The evidence suggests that Thonis-Heracleion wasn't destroyed by one simple event. Instead, geological disasters, flooding, land subsidence, and rising sea levels may have worked together over time. Eventually, the Mediterranean claimed the city. For centuries, Thonis-Heracleion existed mainly in ancient texts. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about a city called Heracleion. Later, the geographer Strabo also described the city, but archaeologists couldn't find it. Early researchers searched on land, and that was the problem. Nobody expected the remains of a major city to be several kilometers offshore beneath the Mediterranean. Then, in the 1990s, underwater archaeologists began systematically surveying the waters of Abu Qir Bay. The project was led by underwater archaeologist Franck Goddio and the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, working with Egyptian authorities. The researchers didn't simply dive randomly, they created detailed maps of the seabed. They used sophisticated geophysical equipment to detect structures buried beneath layers of sediment. Year after year they searched, and then, in the year 2000, the lost city was located, Thonis-Heracleion had been found. It was approximately 6.5 kilometers from today's coastline beneath the waters of Abu Qir Bay. The city that historians had searched for was sitting on the seabed, and what archaeologists discovered there was far more incredible than anyone expected. When archaeologists began exploring the underwater ruins, they discovered something extraordinary. This wasn't simply a collection of broken stones. They were finding the remains of a complex ancient city. There were enormous statues, temple fragments, coins, jewelry, ceramics, religious objects, inscriptions, architectural pieces, and hundreds of ancient anchors. The port itself was enormous. Archaeological research has revealed numerous harbor basins and evidence of intense maritime activity. More than 700 ancient anchors have been discovered, and dozens of ancient ships have been identified in the surrounding waters. These discoveries reveal just how important the city was to Mediterranean trade. But perhaps the most spectacular discoveries were the colossal statues. Imagine diving through dark water and suddenly seeing the face of an enormous Egyptian figure emerging from the sediment. These statues were created thousands of years ago. They once stood above the people of the city. Now they rested silently beneath the sea. And somehow, the water had preserved pieces of a world that had disappeared from the surface. The sea had turned Thonis-Heracleion into a giant archaeological time capsule. At the center of Thonis-Heracleion stood one of its most important religious monuments, the great temple of Amun-Gareb. This temple was not simply a place of worship. It played an important role in religious ceremonies connected with Egyptian kingship. But the city had another extraordinary religious tradition, the mysteries of Osiris. Every year, an important ceremony connected with the death and rebirth of the god Osiris was performed. According to archaeological evidence, a ceremonial journey connected Thonis-Heracleion with the nearby city of Canopus. Imagine the scene thousands of years ago. A ceremonial boat moves slowly through the city's waterways. Priests perform rituals, people gather along the canals, torches reflect across the water, sacred objects are carried in procession, and the entire city becomes part of a religious celebration. Today, those same canals are underwater. The streets where people once walked are now covered by sediment. The temples where priests once performed ceremonies are now silent. But the archaeological remains still preserve evidence of the rituals that once took place here. And then archaeologists solved another enormous mystery. The names Thonis and Heracleion were actually referring to the same city. For years, historians wondered why ancient sources mentioned both Thonis and Heracleion. Were they two different cities? Or were they two names for the same place? The underwater discoveries finally provided the answer. Thonis was the Egyptian name. Heracleion was the Greek name. They were the same city, two cultures, two names. And the discovery helped solve a mystery that had survived for more than 2,000 years. But another mystery remained. Exactly how did the city disappear? The evidence points toward a combination of natural forces. The land was gradually sinking, sea levels were rising, earthquakes affected the region, and soil liquefaction could cause heavy structures to collapse. Eventually, the coastline changed so dramatically that the city could no longer survive. By the late 8th century AD, Thonis-Heracleion had disappeared beneath the Mediterranean. And then something remarkable happened. The city was forgotten. For centuries, people walked along the Egyptian coast without knowing that an entire ancient city was lying beneath the water. Its streets were gone, its temples were gone, its people were gone. Only fragments of its story survived in ancient writings, until underwater archaeologists finally found it. But perhaps the most incredible part of the story is what remains undiscovered. Today, archaeologists are still exploring Thonis-Heracleion, and here's where the story becomes even more incredible. Researchers estimate that only around 5% of the city has been discovered. Think about that. After years of underwater exploration, after thousands of artifacts, after statues, temples, ships, coins, anchors, and inscriptions have already been found, around 95% of the city may still be waiting beneath the sea. There could be buildings nobody has seen, objects nobody has touched, shipwrecks still buried beneath the sediment, and clues that could completely change what we know about ancient Egypt. The underwater ruins have already revealed something extraordinary. Thonis-Heracleion wasn't simply a lost Egyptian city, it was a crossroads. Egyptians and Greeks lived and interacted here. Merchants arrived from across the Mediterranean, ships carried goods through its harbors, religious ceremonies filled its waterways, and then nature slowly erased it from the surface. Today, where merchants once shouted across crowded docks, there is only the silence of the sea. Where temples once towered above the city, there is darkness. And where thousands of people once lived, there are now ancient stones beneath the waves. For more than 1,000 years, Thonis-Heracleion was lost, but it was never truly gone. It was waiting beneath the Mediterranean for someone to find it. And perhaps the most haunting question is this: if archaeologists have uncovered only a fraction of the city, what secrets are still sleeping beneath the sea? Because somewhere beneath those dark waters, the rest of Thonis-Heracleion is still waiting to tell its story. Please subscribe my channel to know more untold stories